The first thing Robert said when he woke up was more. Not to Vera, not to the room, just to whatever was still playing behind his eyes. His arm swung wide and caught her across the cheek before she could pull back, and that was the second time in 10 minutes he had nearly hit her. So she picked up the glass of water from the nightstand and poured it on him. He came up sputtering, grabbing at the sheets, eyes wild. For a moment he looked genuinely lost, a big man in soaked pajamas blinking at his own bedroom like he had been dropped there from somewhere else entirely. Then the hangover found him and he dropped back against the pillow with a groan that seemed to come from somewhere deep and geological. "What did you do that for?" he said. It was not really a question. Vera set the empty glass down. There was going to be a bruise under her eye by lunchtime. She already knew it. "You were swinging at me in your sleep," she said. Again. Robert pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead and said nothing. On the nightstand his phone showed 4 missed calls from a number she did not recognize and a text he had apparently read at 2 in the morning. She did not ask about it. He had come home from the business reception long after she had gone to bed, loud in the hallway. Pleased with himself in that specific way he got after a few drinks and a room full of people who told him what he wanted to hear. She had listened to him move around the kitchen for a while and then she had pulled the covers up and waited for quiet. It took him about 20 minutes to shower, change, and come downstairs looking more or less human. Vera had coffee going. She put a mug in front of him and 2 aspirin beside it, and he took both without comment. "I need to tell you something," Robert said. She waited. He talked for a while about a man named Archie Drummond, a mining operator, semi-retired, very well connected, who Robert had apparently spent the better part of the previous evening sitting next to at the reception. Drummond had a gold mining site in Nevada he was looking to sell. Shallow ore deposits already partially surveyed, the kind of opportunity that did not stay on the market long. Robert had looked into it a little, done some mental math, and by the time Vera came into the conversation then the conclusion was already fixed. He was going to sell the timber and building supply business, take out loans against what they had and buy into the operation. Vera put her mug down. "You are going to sell the company," she said. "The meeting is this morning. Drummond's people are coming to the office. My father built that business. And I have been running it for 6 years," Robert said, not unkindly in the tone he used when he wanted to sound patient. "This is a different level, Vera. This is real money." She asked the obvious question. If the site was so valuable, why was Drummond selling it? Robert had an answer ready. The man was in his 60s, wanted to retire, already had 2 other operations to manage. It was the kind of answer that explained everything and nothing. "I do not know this person," Vera said. "You met him last night. That is how business works." He picked up his coffee. "You would understand that if you spent less time worrying about pie crusts." She did not say anything. There was not much point. When Robert got that particular steadiness in his voice, not angry, just closed, the conversation was already over. He had made the decision somewhere between the 3rd drink and the drive home, and the discussion they were having now was less a discussion than a courtesy. The kind you extend to someone you have already decided is not going to change your mind. He carried his mug to the kitchen. She heard him opening cabinets, looking for something to eat, moving through the house like a man with somewhere to be. The bruise under her eye was starting to ache. By the time she heard the front door, she was still sitting at the table with her hands around her coffee, thinking about her father. Robert had straightened his tie twice by the time his assistant knocked to say they had arrived. He had been in the office since 8, which was earlier than usual, and he had spent the better part of that time rearranging things on his desk that did not need rearranging. He was ready. He told himself he was ready. Archie Drummond came in first, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a good tan and the kind of unhurried manner that either meant genuine confidence or a very practiced version of it. Behind him was a younger associate, quieter, carrying a leather portfolio and a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. And behind them was a woman. Robert did not place her immediately. She was blonde, well-dressed, the kind of put-together that looked effortless and was not. She came in last but somehow arranged herself at the front of the room without appearing to move quickly, settling into the chair across from his desk with the ease of someone who had already decided this meeting would go the way she wanted. Then she looked at him directly and he felt something drop in his chest. Jenna Marsh. He had not seen her and it had to be 8 years. When he had ended things, she had been living in a rented room near the university, working 2 jobs, and he had been very practical about it. He remembered the hallway of her building. He remembered the sound the door made. He did not remember feeling particularly bad about it, which looking at her now struck him as a miscalculation. "Robbie," she said and smiled in a way that gave him nothing. "Jenna." He kept his voice level. "I did not know you were part of this." "Small world," she said and turned to look around his office with a mild evaluating interest that made him feel like she was appraising something she had not decided to buy yet. Drummond did not waste time. He opened the portfolio on the conference table and walked Robert through the site, a Nevada claim about 40 miles outside Elko shallow ore deposits. Prior survey work showing concentrations in the northwest quadrant projected yield numbers that climbed steadily through the first 3 years of operation. The associate laid out maps and a bound report with tabs. Drummond talked with the easy authority of a man who had sold things before and expected to sell this. The numbers were good. They were almost too clean, which was the kind of thing Robert would have noticed if he had been paying full attention. He was not paying full attention. Jenna had not said much. She sat slightly apart from the two men, one leg crossed over the other, reading something on her phone with apparent indifference. But every time Robert looked at her, she seemed to be on the verge of a thought she had decided not to share, and he kept looking at her. When Drummond finished, the associate opened the wooden box. Inside, resting on a piece of dark cloth, was a gold nugget about the size of a large walnut. It caught the light from the window in a way that was almost unreasonably satisfying, dense and warm and completely itself. Beside it was a certificate of origin stamped and signed identifying the sample as recovered from the specific Nevada claim they had just been discussing. Robert picked up the nugget. It was heavy. He turned it over in his hand. "That is 200 grams, give or take," Drummond said. "Surface find. There is considerably more where that came from." Robert set it down and said what he had planned to say. He would want his attorney to review the purchase agreement before anything was signed, and he intended to send his assistant out to the site for an independent look before money changed hands. It was a reasonable position. It was the right position. Jenna looked up from her phone. "That is very thorough," she said in a tone that made thoroughness sound like something a nervous person did. She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward slightly, and Robert became aware of the distance across the table in a way he had not been a moment before. "We have 3 other interested parties, Robbie. Serious ones. Archie is doing you a favor offering you first look, but if you need another few weeks to run everything through committee." She let it sit there. "I am not saying weeks," Robert said. "Good." She leaned back. "Because this one will not wait." He looked at the nugget again. Then at the certificate. He read it twice, or told himself he did. The associate was watching him with a patient, neutral expression. Drummond was recapping his pen. The thing was, Robert knew what he wanted the answer to be. He had known since the reception, maybe before. The documents looked right. The numbers looked right. The gold in his hand looked like gold. He signed. Drummond shook his hand warmly. The associate gathered the papers with practiced efficiency. Jenna stood and smoothed her jacket, and when Robert came around the table, she was close enough that he could have said something quiet and personal if he had been a different kind of man. Or a braver one. Instead, she said they should celebrate, and that was how they ended up at dinner that evening. The 5 of them at first, then just the 2 of them. In a booth at the back of a restaurant Robert had never taken Vera to. Robert told Vera he needed to fly out to Nevada to inspect the site. "Due diligence," he said. She nodded and went to get his bag from the closet. She packed the way she always did, checked the weather, rolled his shirts so they would not wrinkle, made sure his passport was in the front pocket where he could find it without digging. He was on his phone the whole time. When the car came, he kissed her on the cheek and said he would call when he landed. He did not call when he landed. He was not in Nevada. He was on a barrier island off the Florida Panhandle in a hotel room with a balcony that faced the Gulf. And Jenna Marsh was ordering room service in the next room with the ease of someone who had done this before and found it pleasant. Robert stood on the balcony that first evening and looked at the water and felt with a completeness he had not felt in years, like a man who had figured something out. The week moved the way those weeks do when you are spending money you do not entirely have on someone who is letting you. Dinner at a place with no prices on the menu. A chartered boat one afternoon that Robert felt vaguely seasick on but did not mention. And on the 4th night in a restaurant where the light came through the windows at the right angle and Jenna had worn something that made the other tables look over. He slid a long velvet box across the cloth toward her. Inside was a white gold bracelet set with emeralds, heavy, excessive, the kind of thing that announces itself. She opened it and made a sound of genuine pleasure, which was what he had paid for, and he felt the pride of a man who has made a good investment. Back home on a Tuesday morning, Vera was in the kitchen of the waterfront inn where she worked, finishing the prep for a luncheon order, when her manager came back to tell her there was someone waiting up front. A woman in a gray suit, he said. Said it was a legal matter. The woman introduced herself as an estate attorney. She asked Vera to sit down, and then she asked whether Vera was familiar with a woman named Ruth Calloway, her late father's first cousin, estranged from the family for many years. Vera said she had heard the name once or twice growing up. She did not remember a face. Ruth Calloway had died 11 days earlier. She had died alone in a house on a bluff above the Mississippi Sound 3 miles east of town. Under the terms of her will, everything she owned passed to Vera, a bank account currently in probate, and the property itself, a villa on the bluff, maintained and paid for, with a caretaker under contract through the following year. The attorney set the documents on the table and slid them across with a pen, and then she set down an envelope. She asked that you read this, the attorney said. After you sign, if you prefer. Vera signed. The attorney left. Ally came in from the back and found Vera at the table with the envelope in her hands, not opening it. She pulled up a chair. Vera opened it alone in the break room 20 minutes later. Inside was a single folded page, handwritten, and a photograph, black and white, 2 children on a hill, the water behind them, both of them laughing. Both of them mid-motion, like they had just thrown their hats in the air. On the back in faded ink, Denny and Ruthie Summer. Her father had been called Denny. She had not known that. The letter was not long. Ruth wrote that she was a coward and had been one most of her life, and she wanted at least this one thing to be honest. When their grandmother died, Ruth had maneuvered the inheritance, the land, the money, the whole of it away from Vera's father through a series of legal steps she was not proud of. She built the house on that land. She lived in it for decades. She told herself she was happy and mostly believed it until she did not. By the time Vera's father died in that accident in the mountains, Ruth had waited too long to reach out, and then waiting was all she knew how to do. She was leaving everything to Vera because it should have gone to Vera's father, and because the only thing she could still do right was stop holding on to it. Live well, honey. Do not let anyone talk you out of who you are. Vera sat with the letter for a while. She cried a little, not loudly. She thought about her father, the specific way he laughed, the way he smelled like sawdust and coffee, the fact that he had a cousin he never talked about, and now she understood why. She cried about that too. By 2 o'clock she had told Ally, and by 3 they were in Ally's car heading east on the coast road. The attorney had given her an address and a name, Earl Simmons, the caretaker. He had been notified. They almost missed the turn. The road narrowed between a line of oaks before it climbed, and then the trees opened up, and there at the top of the rise were the gates already open, and an older man standing beside them with a hand raised in greeting. Earl Simmons was somewhere in his 70s, lean, unhurried, with the particular ease of someone who had been taking care of things for a long time and was comfortable with the responsibility. He shook Vera's hand and looked at her steadily. "You favor him," he said. "Your daddy. She always said you would." He turned and gestured up the path. "Come on. Let me show you what she left you." The path from the gate climbed gently through a double row of live oaks before the house came into view, and when it did, both women stopped walking at the same moment without meaning to. It was white stucco with a terracotta roof, 2 stories with arched windows that caught the afternoon light and held it. The upper terrace ran the full width of the house and faced south toward the Sound. Bougainvillea climbed the near corner in a wash of deep red. Below the main level, the bluff fell away in a series of terraced gardens, wide flat steps cut into the hillside, planted with things that had been tended for years. Magnolias, rosemary gone woody and tall. A row of fig trees along the lower wall, their branches heavy. Lord Ally said quietly. Earl let them stand there for a moment before he continued talking. He had been maintaining the property for 11 years, he said, since before Ruth's health had begun to decline. There was a kitchen garden on the east side, still productive. A guest house behind the main building, separate entrance, small but sound. The main house had 4 bedrooms, 2 of which Ruth had closed off in her last few years. Everything worked. He had made sure of that. He walked them through the downstairs, wide plank floors, high ceilings, a kitchen with windows on 2 sides, a sitting room with French doors that opened onto the lower terrace. The furniture was old and good. Ruth had not been a person who replaced things when they still worked. On the mantel in the sitting room there was a small framed photograph, the same 2 children from the picture in the envelope, slightly larger print and better light. Vera stopped in front of it. Earl waited. She kept that there the whole time I knew her, he said. Never moved it. They went upstairs and out through the master bedroom onto the upper terrace. The Sound opened in front of them without warning the full width of its silver gray in the late afternoon, with a line of pelicans moving low over the water in the middle distance and the opposite shore barely visible through the haze. The air smelled like salt and something green. Vera put her hands on the railing and did not say anything for a moment. Earl showed them the rest of the grounds and then excused himself to lock up the guest house, and the two women drifted back to the upper terrace as the light began to change. Allie had found 2 mugs in the kitchen and made coffee from a canister Earl had left on the counter. They sat in the chairs that faced the water, and for a while neither of them felt the need to talk. The sun was halfway down when Allie asked when Vera planned to tell Robert. After he is back, Vera said. He has got enough going on with the trip. Allie turned her mug in both hands. He is going to want to sell it. I know. Or fold it into whatever he is doing with the mining thing. I know, Vera said again. She was not arguing. She was just looking at the water. There was a pause. A long one, the kind that means something is waiting on the other side of it. There is something I should have told you, Allie said. A while ago. I should have said it then. Vera looked at her. Allie kept her eyes on the water. She said it plainly without making it into more than it was. Last year, the night of the dinner party, she had come to the house. She had been running late and she had knocked and Robert had answered the door. He looked at her and told her the party was for guests, not kitchen staff. He said she smelled like the restaurant and he was not going to have that in his house. He told her to go home. Vera had wondered that whole evening why Allie never showed. Allie had texted the next morning saying she had not felt well. Vera had believed her because it had not occurred to her not to. She did not say anything now. She picked up her coffee and held it and looked at the water, the same evening light. Allie did not apologize for telling her. There was not anything to apologize for. They sat there until the sun was gone and the Sound turned dark and the first few lights appeared on the far shore. Then Vera stood up and said they should probably get back. They had work in the morning. She said it the way you say a practical thing when you are thinking about something else entirely. Robert woke up alone on the last morning of the trip and did not register it immediately. The other side of the bed was empty, but that was not unusual. Jenna was an early riser, or had been that week. He lay there for a few minutes listening for the sound of the shower. There was no shower. There was no sound at all except the air conditioning and the Gulf outside. Her luggage was gone. Her toiletries, her clothes, the velvet box, the bracelet had come in, all of it. The room had been tidied in a specific way that suggested she had been careful about leaving, which was worse somehow than if she had just walked out. On the desk there was nothing. He checked his phone. No messages. He called down to the front desk to ask about a late checkout, and the woman on the line told him with practiced neutrality that the reservation had been cancelled that morning by the other guest on the booking. Both rooms. She was very sorry, but checkout was at 11, and it was currently 10:40. He was on a flight home by 2 in the afternoon. He told Vera the inspection had gone fine, but the trip got cut short, a scheduling issue, nothing to worry about. She made dinner. They ate without saying much. He drank more than he ate, and she did not comment on it, and somewhere around 9 o'clock she was washing dishes when she heard the knock at the door. His assistant's name was Craig, and he had the look of a man who had driven to this house knowing he was delivering something bad and had decided on the way that he was going to say it straight. He came in and sat at the kitchen table, and put a folder down, and told Robert what he had found in Nevada. The site was an abandoned mining claim. The shaft had not seen active operation in decades. There was no equipment worth mentioning, a rusted ore cart, some old timber supports, a hand tool or two. The survey reports in the folder Robert had signed were fabricated. The certificate of origin for the gold sample had a registration number that did not exist in any federal geological database. And the sample itself, Craig slid a printed page across the table, was iron pyrite, iron sulfide. It had the color and the weight and the surface sheen that made it look right, especially in a nice box under good light in a room where someone wanted it to be right. Fool's gold, Craig said. That is what people call it. Robert sat very still. Craig kept talking. He was thorough and maybe a little angry, and he did not look away from Robert while he spoke. The purchase price for the claim had already cleared. The business sale had closed the week prior. The private loan secured through a lender Craig named with some contempt carried an interest rate that compounded monthly. And the house. Craig paused here just briefly. The house had been refinanced in the spring. Both signatures on the deed of trust. He looked at Vera when he said that. Vera set down the dish she was holding. She had signed something in the spring. Robert had brought home a stack of documents on a Thursday evening, told her it was a business refinancing, standard stuff, pointed to the lines. She had signed. She remembered thinking she should read it more carefully and deciding she would ask him about it later and then not asking. Robert started talking and then he started shouting. He moved through the kitchen and the blame moved with him. The assistant who should have caught this sooner, the lawyers who had not flagged the documents, Vera for not understanding business. Vera for the villa she was sitting on while he was drowning. Vera generally. He used words she had heard before and some she had not. Craig stood up at some point and said he was done, and Robert told him to get out, and he did, the front door closing behind him with a firmness that was not quite a slam. Vera said she would not sell the villa. She said it once clearly, and Robert went quiet in the middle of whatever he had been saying next. The quiet was different from the shouting. The shouting was just noise. The quiet had a shape to it. He poured another drink and sat down and did not look at her. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark and listened to him move around below the television, the clink of the bottle, nothing, for a long stretch, then nothing again. Somewhere after midnight she heard him make a sound she could not interpret. Not words. Just a short sound like something landing. She found out later what it was. His phone had lit up with a message from a number he apparently still had saved. It said, "Hope the trip was educational, Robbie. You left me in that hallway and walked away whistling. Did you really think I forgot? Do not look for me. I am long gone. And just so you know, that bracelet was a 7. I have seen better." Robert sat with that for a while in the dark. Then he put the phone face down on the table and finished his drink. 2 days later he was in the hospital with a throat infection that had turned serious, and Vera was driving him there, and neither of them mentioned any of it on the way. The infection had started as a sore throat the morning after Craig's visit and had become something worse by the end of the week: fever, swollen glands. The kind of pain that made swallowing feel like a serious undertaking. The urgent care doctor took one look and sent him to the county medical center, and Robert, who normally resisted any suggestion that his body was not fully under his control, went without argument because he genuinely felt terrible. He was admitted to a private room on the 2nd floor. Room 10. Vera drove him, filled out the paperwork, spoke to the admitting nurse, and drove home to pack him a bag with things he would need for a few days. She brought it back that evening along with a container of soup she had made from scratch because the hospital intake menu had already offended him. That was how the visit started. Every afternoon she came with food, soft things easy to swallow, made carefully: a smooth potato leek soup, poached chicken in broth, a custard she had learned from a woman she used to work under, sweet but not too sweet. Robert ate everything and complained about the temperature or the portion or the fact that she had not brought coffee, but he ate it. The nurses noticed. One of them told Vera she was very kind. Vera said she was just cooking. On the 5th day Robert's doctor came in with good news, delivered in a tone that Robert did not receive as good news. The infection was responding, the fever had broken, and he could realistically expect to be discharged in 3 days. Robert said he was still having chest pressure and dizziness. The doctor examined him again, found nothing, ordered an additional round of tests, and extended the stay with the mild skepticism of someone who has seen this before. Robert thanked him, and then lay back and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man running numbers. Vera did not know any of this. On the afternoon she walked into the wrong room. She had been coming from the elevator and misjudged the turn. Room 10 was to the left, and she went right into a room at the end of the hall that she had always passed without looking at. The door was partly open. She pushed it and stepped in, and it took her a moment to understand what she was seeing: an elderly woman on the floor between the bed and the window, one hand pressed flat against the wall, trying without success to push herself upright. The call button was on the bed, out of reach. The window above her was open and the curtain was moving in the draft, and the woman was not making any sound, just breathing in the careful, measured way of someone conserving what they have. Vera set her bag down and crossed the room and got her arms under the woman and lifted. The woman weighed almost nothing. Vera got her onto the bed and hit the call button and held her hand and talked to her steadily until the nurse came and then the doctor. And then she stepped back against the wall and waited while they worked. The woman's name was Dorothy Crane. The nurses called her Miss Dot. She was in her late 70s, a widow for many years, no children. Her only nephew, her last close family, had been killed in a car accident 3 months prior. She had been admitted for cardiac monitoring after a minor episode, and she had been largely alone since she arrived. When the medical team finished and the room settled, Dot turned her head on the pillow and looked at Vera with eyes that were sharp and dark and not remotely confused. "You are strong," she said. Her voice was hoarse but direct. "For a young woman." "I cook for a living," Vera said. "You move a lot of heavy things." Dot considered this. "Which room are you visiting?" 10, Vera said. "My husband." Something moved across Dot's face, not quite a reaction, more like a file being quietly opened. She did not say anything else about it. Vera came back that evening with 2 containers instead of 1. She stayed longer than she meant to. Dot asked questions and listened to the answers with the full attention of someone who had learned late in life not to waste a good conversation. She was funny in a dry, unhurried way. She had opinions about things and stated them without apology. By the time Vera left, she felt in a way she could not have explained that the wrong turn down the hallway had been the most useful thing she had done all week. She kept coming back. Every visit to Robert, then a stop at Dot's room, then sometimes a second stop on the way out. She brought food for both of them. She and Dot talked about cooking and about loneliness and about what it meant to take care of people who did not particularly notice they were being taken care of. One afternoon, leaving Robert's room, she passed 2 nurses in the hallway who were talking in the lowered voices of people who think they are out of earshot. Something about the patient in room 10. How he had spoken to the overnight aide. What he had said when his tray came in wrong. Vera kept walking. She already knew which room they meant. Dot had been walking the corridor for 3 days, by then short trips, at first just to the window at the end of the hall and back, and then a little farther each time. The physical therapist had encouraged it. Her cane was an old one, dark wood with a rubber tip, and she moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned not to waste steps. She had thought about Robert Calloway more than she had mentioned to Vera. What Vera had let slip across their conversations in the small, almost incidental way that people reveal things when they are not trying to make a case, had assembled itself in Dot's mind into a picture she did not like. A man who had taken over a business that was not his, borrowed against a house that was not entirely his, and was now in a hospital room running out of time. Vera kept feeding him. Vera kept coming. That part bothered Dot most. She had decided to speak to him. Not dramatically, just plainly, the way she had spoken plainly to difficult people for the better part of 78 years. She would tell him that his wife was a person worth noticing, and that whatever he was planning he ought to think carefully. She was not sure it would accomplish anything. She was going to do it anyway. She found room 10 without trouble. The door was pulled almost shut, not latched, and she could hear voices inside, 2 men, both keeping their volume down in the particular way that means the volume is intentional. She stopped with her hand a few inches from the door. Robert's voice she recognized. The other one she did not. It was lower, with a flat, unhurried quality that she associated with men who had learned not to sound excited about anything. She stood very still and listened. Robert was talking about the villa, not asking, instructing. He wanted the other man to go to the house, he said. When Vera was there alone. He wanted her scared enough to sign. If it took more than words, he said, then whatever it took. Get her to agree to sell, and Robert would handle the rest, the listing, the closing, the paperwork. Once the money came in, he would file. He had already talked to someone about the divorce. He was going to make sure the outstanding debt stayed attached to her name in the settlement, and by the time she understood what had happened, he would be gone. The other man said 10% of the sale price. Robert said fine. The other man said he would go that evening. Dot stepped back from the door. She moved carefully, 1 step at a time, keeping the cane quiet against the floor. She made it to the alcove near the supply room before she heard the other man's voice again, something short, confirmatory, and then the sounds of someone getting ready to leave. She pressed herself into the alcove. A man came out of room 10 and walked the other direction toward the stairwell without looking back. Big, broad through the shoulders, the kind of unhurried walk that meant he was comfortable taking up space. He pushed through the stairwell door and was gone. Dot stood in the alcove for a moment. Her heart was going faster than she wanted it to. She breathed through it, and then walked back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and picked up her phone. Vera answered on the second ring. I need you to come in, Dot said. Today. Soon as you can. Vera came within the hour. She sat in the chair beside Dot's bed and listened without interrupting while Dot told her what she had heard, not softened, not rearranged, just what was said and in what order. The threat. The instruction to use force if necessary. The divorce and the debt. The 10%. When Dot finished, the room was quiet for a moment. His name, Vera said. The other man. Did you hear a name? No, but I would know him again. Big man. Bald. Walks like he owns the floor under him. Vera nodded slowly. She was not crying. She looked the way people look when something they half knew becomes something they fully know, not surprised exactly, but altered. Okay, she said. I have people, Dot said. An attorney I trust. And I have been running a small investment fund for 15 years, which means I know how paper moves and how to make it say what I need it to say. She looked at Vera steadily. He wants to use the villa against you. I think we can let him believe he already has. Vera looked at her. Do not go home tonight, Dot said. I have a key to my apartment. You will stay there. And tomorrow we will sit down and work out exactly what we are going to do. Vera stayed at Dot's apartment that night and the 2 nights after. It was a small place on the 2nd floor of an older building near the water, tidy, full of books, with a guest room that smelled like cedar and had a window that faced east. Vera slept better than she had in weeks, which told her something she did not particularly want to think about. Dot's attorney was a woman named Patricia Suggs, compact and precise, who came to the apartment on the 2nd morning with a briefcase and no small talk. She sat at the kitchen table with Vera and Dot and laid out what they were going to do. Dot's Investment LLC would generate a purchase agreement for the villa, a real document correctly formatted with all the right language and Vera's signature on it. No deed would be filed with the Harrison County Recorder's Office. No money would move. The agreement would exist on paper and nowhere else. If Robert showed it to his own attorney, it would look exactly like what it claimed to be. The only place it would fail was in front of a judge with access to the county's property records, at which point it would fail completely. Patricia said this without apparent enjoyment. It was just the mechanism. Vera signed the agreement 2 days later. Then she packed a bag with some of Robert's preferred foods, drove to the medical center, and walked into room 10 looking like a woman who had not been sleeping. She did not have to manufacture much. She sat in the chair beside his bed and told him she had made a decision. She had sold the villa to a real estate fund. The closing had moved fast, they had made a cash offer and she had taken it. The money was sitting in her account. She had not wanted to do it, she said. She had cried about it. But she could not watch him go under. She watched his face while she said it. Dot had described it accurately. The relief moved through him like something loosening, and he almost managed to keep it off his face, but not quite. His expression went through a brief sequence: sympathy, gratitude, a thing that was almost tenderness, and landed somewhere that had very little to do with her. He reached over and put his hand on hers. He said she was a good person. He said he did not deserve her, which was the first entirely true thing he had said to her in some time. Then he said he needed to tell her something and he hoped she would understand. He thought they should end the marriage. He was not in love anymore, had not been for a while if he was honest, and he owed her that honesty. It was not about anything she had done. He just thought they had grown apart. He said it with the careful sorrow of someone delivering news that is actually working in his favor. Vera nodded. She said she appreciated him being honest with her. She said she would see him in court. He looked mildly surprised that she did not cry. The divorce hearing was 6 weeks later in the Harrison County Courthouse, a Wednesday morning, in a room that smelled like old carpet and central air. Robert's attorney, a man named Garrett who wore a good suit and spoke with the confidence of someone billing by the hour, laid out the argument. Vera Calloway had liquidated a significant inherited asset during the period leading up to the divorce filing, and the proceeds of that sale should properly be considered when determining the division of marital resources. He produced the purchase agreement. He made it sound reasonable. Patricia Suggs waited until he was finished. Then she handed the judge a 2-page document from the Harrison County Recorder's Office showing every deed transfer and property filing associated with the address on Tillman Bluff Road for the past 30 years. There was no sale recorded. No deed had been transferred. The purchase agreement Garrett had just presented to the court had never been executed in any legal sense. No title had moved, no county record existed. No money had ever been deposited or withdrawn in connection with any such transaction. The LLC had simply drafted a piece of paper. That was all it had ever been. Garrett asked for a recess. The judge gave him 10 minutes. When they came back, Robert was sitting differently in his chair, smaller, or maybe just less arranged. The hearing did not take much longer after that. The family home was already encumbered past its value by the loan Robert had taken out, and Vera did not contest it. She was not interested in inheriting his debt. She walked away from the house her parents had owned without fighting for it because the fight was not worth what it would cost her. What she kept was her name, her father's name LeBeau restored, and the villa on the bluff, and the account in probate that had been Ruth Calloway's and was now entirely hers. She walked out of the courthouse into the October heat and stood on the steps for a moment. Patricia was behind her saying something about paperwork and timelines. Vera heard her. She was also looking at the parking lot, the ordinary weekday cars, the live oak at the far end dropping leaves onto the hoods. Robert had believed she sold it because selling was what he would have done. That was the whole thing, really. She had not needed to outmaneuver him. She had just needed to know him. She went to get her car. She moved into the villa the week the divorce was finalized. There was not much to bring: some clothes, her knives, a box of books. The photograph of her father and Ruth as children that she had taken from the mantel on her first visit and kept on her nightstand at Dot's apartment. Earl helped her carry things in without being asked and without making it into an occasion, which was exactly right. Dot moved into the guest house the following month. She said it was temporary, that she did not want to impose, and Vera said she would believe that when she saw it, and they left it there. Earl reinforced the guest house steps and rehung the screen door and did not comment on the arrangement. By November, the three of them had settled into a loose daily rhythm: coffee on the upper terrace in the mornings when the weather allowed, Earl working somewhere on the grounds. Dot reading. Vera usually already gone to the waterfront by 8. She had found the cafe space in October, a narrow storefront on the harbor walk 2 blocks from the marina. The kind of place that had been 3 different businesses in 10 years and just needed someone to decide what it was. She signed the lease, painted it herself with Alice's help over 2 weekends, and opened on the shore on a Thursday in early December with 6 tables, a counter with 4 stools, a menu she had written on a chalkboard, and no idea whether anyone would come. They came. Slowly at first, then steadily. Then, on weekend mornings, there was sometimes a wait. Robert left the state in January. She heard it secondhand: someone who knew someone who worked near the courthouse. He had liquidated what little remained, settled part of what he owed the private lender, and flown out. Where exactly, no one seemed to know or particularly care. She heard his name a few more times over the following months, each time fainter, and then she stopped hearing it at all. A year passed the way good years do, not without difficulty, but without the specific kind of dread she had grown used to carrying. The cafe had its rhythms. She hired a part-time cook in the spring and a counter-person in the summer when the tourist traffic picked up. She got better at the business side of things, the ordering and the margins, and the conversations with the linen supplier, all of it. Some evenings she sat on the upper terrace after the cafe closed and felt, without quite being able to name it, that she was living inside something she had built. It was a quiet feeling. She would take it. She was sometimes lonely. She did not pretend otherwise, at least not to herself. But it was a clean kind of lonely, the kind that belongs to you, and she had learned the difference. Marcus Cole walked into on the shore on a Tuesday evening in late September, about 40 minutes before closing. He was tall, somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from years of actual outdoor work rather than the weekend variety. He sat at the counter and looked at the chalkboard for a moment and ordered coffee black, the strongest she had. She poured it, and he drank it without performing any opinion about it, which she appreciated. He had lost his anchor in a squall that morning, he said. His boat was in the marina 2 blocks over. He was trying to figure out where to source a replacement, not a standard size and older fitting, the kind of thing that was not easy to find. Dot was at her usual corner table with a book, ostensibly reading. Vera saw her look up. "There is an old anchor in the equipment shed," Dot said from across the room without looking up from the page. "Been there since before I can remember. You are welcome to it if it fits, in exchange for taking a look at the roof on the guest house. The fascia on the east side needs attention." Marcus turned on his stool. He looked at Dot for a moment with an expression that was somewhere between surprised and respectful. "That is a fair trade," he said. Dot turned a page. "I thought so. The anchor fit." He looked at the roof the next morning and spent 3 days on it, working clean and quiet, and then he found other things that needed doing and did those too. He ate at the cafe most mornings and some evenings. He was not a man who filled silence unnecessarily, which made the silences comfortable. In the evenings when Vera walked down to the water after closing, he was sometimes there, and they would sit on the low wall above the beach and talk or not talk and watch the lights on the sound. On the last evening before his boat was ready, he came into the cafe after the other customers had gone and sat at the counter while she wiped down the surfaces and turned off the case lights. He said he had been sailing for a long time. He said he had been looking without quite admitting it to himself for a place that felt like somewhere he could stop. Vera folded the cloth over the edge of the sink. She looked at him. "So stop," she said. They walked down to the water after that and sat on the wall in the dark, the cafe lights warm behind them, the sound moving steady and quiet out ahead. There was not much else that needed saying. The water did not require an explanation, and neither did this.